The Vurax Dominion did not understand fear, not truly. They had evolved beyond instinct, they claimed, beyond trembling and flinching and sleepless nights. They believed themselves immune to the primitive whispers of terror. And so, when they captured the human soldier on Rackle 5, they believed they had acquired a thing, not a threat. They called him Elias Wren. Rank, Sergeant. Role, Reconnaissance and Survival Specialist. Captured during a sabotage operation gone wrong when his dropship crashed through a glacier shelf, found half-frozen, bleeding, and alone. He should have died within the hour. He lasted 6 days in the snow before they caught him. Naked, weaponless, smiling. Such defiance, said Overseer Lorak as he stood before the containment unit. Even now he breathes without panic. The room around them hissed with sterilized air and the faint buzz of neural dampeners. Elias sat inside the transparent cell, wrists and ankles bound with polycarbon restraints, his skin pale from frostbite and bruising. Electrodes dotted his temples. His heartbeat was steady. Pulse remains unfluctuating, observed one of the analysts. No measurable fear response. Lorak studied the soldier. Why does he not speak? He has not made a sound since capture. None. Only breathing. The overseer stepped closer. Through the glass, he met Elias Wren's eyes. Calm, quiet, watching, breathing. The Vurax prided themselves on their Red Room, a facility dedicated to extracting information from any species. Not through crude violence, but precision unraveling. Memories could be peeled back like layers, beliefs dissected, sanity sliced apart one synapse at a time. The humans had proven frustratingly resistant, but they had never captured one like Wren. He was sent to the Red Room within hours. Wren counted the seconds with his breath. 4 in, 4 out. He wasn't meditating. He wasn't staying calm for their benefit. This was just what he did. Breathing was rhythm. Rhythm was control, and control was everything. They had taken his gear, his voice, his name. They would not take his mind. The room changed around him, lights shifting from red to violet. Frequencies rose and fell. Chemical stimulants were fed through the air system. He felt the sting of old wounds reopening. A tremor tried to take his fingers. He breathed through it. The Vurax interrogator entered with a tool that looked like a spider made of glass. It latched to Wren's head, unspooling filaments that danced across his skull. The machine spoke in hums and flashes, trying to trigger involuntary memories. Wren let it in. He let it see, and what it saw wasn't pain. It was training. It was fire. It was a man chewing his own broken fingers to pull a shrapnel shard from his arm. It was blood, frozen into camouflage. It was laughter after amputating his own toe to avoid frostbite. The interrogator paused. Wren looked up and finally spoke. Just one word. Breathe. The interrogator stumbled backward. The device sparked. A low, rising panic started in its eyes. 2 hours later, the Red Room's control center received an alert. The interrogator was dead. No wounds, no toxins, brain intact. But his mind was gone, frozen mid-scream in a coma state. Playback footage showed Wren sitting still. No movement, no attack, only breathing. He did something, said Lorak. Some trick, some psychic defense. No readings support that, the analyst whispered. There is no psionic ability, no implants, just him. Lorak turned toward the cell again. Wren was looking right at the camera. Slowly, deliberately, he exhaled. For the first time in decades, Lorak felt cold. The Red Room had no doors. It absorbed its prisoners like a digestive tract. One-way entry, no exit. Built 100 kilometers below the frozen crust of Vurax moon Kesh 9, it was not designed to kill. It was designed to unravel. Sergeant Elias Wren sat at the center of it all, cross-legged on a metal platform suspended in midair. No walls, no ceiling. Just a void of dark geometry and surveillance eyes watching from every impossible angle. The room was alive, learning him. The interrogators called it the layering process. First, isolate, then confuse, then fragment. Wren just breathed. Overseer. Lorak reviewed the neuroscans in silence. Still no cognitive degradation? He asked. None, the neuroanalyst answered, fingers twitching nervously over the control interface. There are anomalies, yes, but they're self-induced. He's resisting through focus, intent. He's letting our systems in, but only into the places he wants us to see. Impossible, Lorak snapped. Not impossible, came a voice. From behind, Lorak turned to see Inquisitor Vrask, a tall Vurax with 6 metallic limbs and a voice like oil in water. He hadn't been summoned. He didn't need to be. Only human. Vrask entered the Red Room without ceremony. Inside, Wren's eyes didn't flicker. His breathing didn't change. Vrask circled him slowly. I've heard stories about your kind, Vrask said. War apes, kill beasts, pain seekers, but I never believed them. Wren didn't answer. Vrask's metallic fingers unspooled a sphere, the slicer, a sensory dissonance field. It isolated nerve signals and fed them back, in jumbled loops amplifying pain and confusion without causing visible injury. He activated it. The sphere spun. The air shimmered. Wren blinked once. Vrask narrowed his eyes. Do you feel it, human? Wren nodded slowly. Then scream, Vrask said. Wren leaned forward slightly, exhaled through his nose. Elsewhere. In the monitoring station, one of the junior analysts staggered backward. He gripped the edge of the console, heart racing. I heard something, he whispered. What? I don't know. A breath, but it felt wrong. You've been watching too long. Go get a stim dose. But even as the analyst left, others began noticing it too. The sound. That breathing. Even when the mics were off. Back in the Red Room, Vrask increased the slicer's output. Your body should be on fire, he hissed. You should be begging me. Wren looked up, eyes clear. No tears, no flinch. He said very softly, I've trained in Arctic exposure, suffocation drills, isolation tanks, and pain response loops. You're not unique. You're just late. Then he smiled. Vrask recoiled, visibly shaken. It was the smile of someone who had already won. The slicer reached maximum output. Red Room lights flickered, power surged, and Wren, with infinite calm, began to breathe louder. Ha! 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 The lights died. An hour later, Vrask was found in his quarters, curled in the corner, rocking and whispering, Turn it off. Turn it off. Turn it off. Over and over. He refused to speak again, not even to the High Council. Overseer Lorak demanded a halt to operations, but it was too late. The Red Room systems were glitching. The walls sometimes breathed. The cameras cut out when focused on Wren's face. A maintenance drone tried to self-disassemble when it heard a noise it couldn't classify. It was breathing. By the end of the day, the Red Room had lost 3 staff. To mental collapse, 2 to spontaneous catatonia, and 1 who carved the word listen into his own chitin before throwing himself down the elevator shaft. Wren hadn't moved. He hadn't touched a soul. But something had begun, something the Vurax could no longer control. Elias Wren didn't know how long he had been in the Red Room. Time didn't work the same there. The lights had no rhythm. The meals, when they remembered to send any, tasted of chemical fog. Voices behind the walls whispered in mechanical tones, asking questions he never answered. Still, he breathed. Even when the slicer tried to scramble his nervous system, even when they locked him in sensory inversion tanks for days, even when the interrogators whispered false news of Earth's destruction 4 in, 4 out. No faster, no slower. The Vurax began whispering in their own way, too. They used to call him the Beast, a title of mockery, contempt, but now they whispered a new one through clenched mandibles and static-laced comms, the Unbreakable. Chapter 1. Sub-Level 12, a biotechnician named Corin prepared the next device, the Mind Loom. It wasn't a torture device, not in the traditional sense. It was a psi-threading system designed to entangle a subject's thoughts, weave them into artificial dreamscapes, then manipulate core memories. It had reduced entire battle-hardened warriors to crying husks in hours. Corin had never failed with it. She was confident, until she stepped into the chamber. Ren looked up at her. His face was pale, sunken, bruised, but his eyes were steady. He didn't speak, didn't blink. He just breathed. Ha. Corin swallowed, forcing herself to attach the probes. The dreamscape initialized and immediately collapsed. What happened? Overseer Lorak barked over the comm. Corin's hands trembled. He hijacked it. Lorak leaned forward, cold dread flooding him. What do you mean? He's in control, Corin whispered. Inside the mind loom, Ren stood in an impossible space, a reconstruction of a battlefield long past. Snow falling, smoke rising, shadows moving. This was his memory, his trauma. They had tried to use it against him. Instead, he used it against them. The Vurax observer tethered into the dreamscape screamed as the scene turned. The battlefield wasn't filled with dying humans. It was dying Vurax, torn apart by shadows they couldn't see. Ren stood at the center of it, breathing. One of the shadows leaned close to the observer's face and whispered, "This is what we are." The observer flatlined. No physical wounds, just neural collapse. Corin disconnected, sobbing, unable to understand how the mind loom had become his. Ren exhaled as the lights returned to the chamber. Elsewhere in the facility, small things began to change. Guards refused to work near his cell for more than 5-minute shifts. Scientists demanded remote access only. One janitor filed a transfer after reporting hearing breathing through his earplugs, even on a different floor. The recordings of Ren's vitals began corrupting themselves. Audio logs came back warped. There was never screaming, only breathing. Humans don't have psychic resistance, Lorak growled in frustration. They're not telepaths. They're not energy manipulators. This is impossible. A senior war theorist reviewed the files. She didn't disagree. He's not resisting, she said. He's redefining the field. What? He's not playing defense. He's turning every system into an offense. Every attempt to fracture him strengthens the myth. He's learned how to weaponize silence, presence, fear. She paused. Or maybe he always knew how. Inside the Red Room, Ren remained still. He had not screamed once. He had not lashed out, made threats, or raised his voice. But the Vurax around him were beginning to unravel, and all he had done was breathe. They sealed Elias Ren in a null emission pod. No cameras, no microphones, no sensors. A perfect vacuum of data, no air, no sound, no light. The Vurax believed that without observation, the threat would fade. Silence would starve. They were wrong. That was when people began to die. It started small. A junior technician collapsed during a routine systems check. Cause of death: massive neural spike, no signs of trauma. His final log read, I can hear it, but he's not here. I think it's in me now. No one took it seriously until the next body fell, and the next. and the next overseer. Lorak assembled a crisis council in the upper levels. 8 officials sat in a circle, all of them veterans of mental warfare, hardened against psychological contagion. They played no audio logs. They read no transcripts. They spoke only in text. Across isolated terminals, and still, by the end of the session, 3 of them were dead. 1 by self-immolation, 1 by heart failure, 1 by manually removing her own eyes. "This isn't tactics," whispered Dr. Vare, the Dominion's leading neuroexorcist. "This isn't even war. It's a contagion of fear, a mimetic infection." Lorak stared at the data. Ren hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken a word since Part 1. He hadn't even been seen. Just remembered. Far from the facility, on an orbital relay station, a signal technician reviewed a corrupted transmission from Kesh 9. The message was garbled, distorted, almost entirely static, but beneath it, he heard it. Ha! Long, steady exhale. He froze. His mind conjured a cell, a pale figure, a void where a man sat and made no demands, no threats, just breathed. The technician's eyes rolled back. His last act was broadcasting that breath to every Dominion relay across the sector. On Kesh 9, the death toll passed 57. Still, Ren remained in containment, unmoving, untouched, feared. The Vurax began burning their own data archives. They purged recordings of Ren's capture. They deleted all voice logs from the Red Room. They ordered verbal descriptions of him to be forbidden. No officer was allowed to say his name, but it was too late, because now the prisoners in other wings were chanting. Not words, just breathing. It's a cognitive resonance loop, Dr. Vare explained with dry horror. They tried to read him and he read them back. Now anything that perceives him becomes part of the loop. Lorak shook his head. He's one human. Just one. Not anymore, Vare whispered. Now he's an idea that haunted a species. Inside the null emission pod, Elias Wren remained still. His world was darkness, pressure, cold. But he was trained for this. He remembered the Earth Defense Corps' SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, escape. What they taught him wasn't how to break chains. They taught him how to survive being broken. He had withstood pain, deprivation, silence. But what he gave the Vurax was worse. Stillness, reflection. They saw a man who could endure the worst without screaming, a man who needed nothing to fight back, a man who could breathe and make whole species listen. A scream echoed through the compound. Another Vurax lost control, clawing at their own chest. No cause, no wounds, just terror. Some began calling for evacuation. Others demanded Ren's execution, but no one dared enter the pod. Not anymore. They feared that if they opened it, they'd see him again. And if they saw him, they'd hear him. And if they heard him, they'd never stop. When the Dominion Council received the emergency communique from Kesh 9, their decision was swift. Shut it down. Seal the moon. No retrieval. No salvage. No survivors. The entire installation, including the Red Room, was to be buried beneath. Kilometers of molten mantle and adaptive stone plating. Elias Wren, what was left of him, would be encased in a tomb of engineered silence. They believed that without hosts, without observers, the mimetic contagion would die. But ideas don't die, especially not when they've already taken root. Day 1. Evacuation. 57 ships evacuated what remained of the Kesh 9 personnel. Most of them had lost their minds. A few hadn't spoken. In days. One vessel ignored protocol and tried to breach the null pod for a final cleansing. They never made it past the airlock. The entire crew asphyxiated, not because of vacuum failure, because they all stopped breathing. Day 3. collapse. Begin's automated machinery drilled boreholes and filled the Red Room with reactive silicates and ferroglass. Drones melted the structure into slag and sealed it under black crust. The atmosphere boiled. Earthquakes rippled through the dead rock. Satellites above were redirected to destroy any signal attempting to escape. Still, reports came in. "We're still hearing it. My dreams, they're echoing, breathing, just breathing." Day 5. Whisper Protocol High Overseer Lorak, now pale and hunched, initiated Whisper Protocol, a total black site lockdown. All data involving Elias Wren was ordered scrubbed from Dominion archives. Files deleted, witnesses silenced, entire departments sterilized. But some things couldn't be deleted, because Wren didn't live in files anymore. He lived in memory, in fear, in the breath before sleep. Day 7. The final broadcast from deep under the crust of Kesh 9, a signal broke through. Low frequency, minimal power, untraceable, except to those already marked, a single sound. Ha ha ha! The Dominion jammed it, scrambled it, fired kinetic rods into the transmission site from orbit. It didn't matter. By then, the signal was inside them. "Breathing isn't supposed to have a direction," muttered Dr. Vare as she gazed into a darkened console. "But this breath comes toward you." She didn't speak again. She just stopped moving. Meanwhile, deep beneath the crust, Wren sat in a void of black stone. No light, no heat, no air, no sound. And yet, he breathed. Because discipline was oxygen. He had accepted what he was, what they had turned him into. He hadn't broken under their torture. He had become the reflection of it. Mirror they couldn't shatter. He had no weapons, no army, no voice, but the Voraks had given him all he needed, attention, because once they feared him, they could no longer look away, and once they couldn't look away, he didn't have to escape. They carried him with them. Far across the galaxy, Dominion commanders woke from sweating nightmares. Noble houses began reporting hallucinations of a pale figure sitting in silence. And on fringe worlds, rumors spread of an ancient cell buried beneath a dead moon, containing a human who had conquered a species without ever leaving his chair. No empire could contain that kind of story. No prison could silence that kind of fear. On Kesh 9, seismic sensors went dark, not from destruction, but from stillness, too still, as if the moon itself was holding its breath. There was no war, there were no battles, there was only the slow unraveling of an empire that had once feared nothing and now feared everything. The Dominion's intelligence network fractured. Communications routed around entire sectors rather than risk passing signals near Kesh 9. Fleet logistics failed. A third of the outer colonies abandoned Central Command and declared autonomous rule. Not because they wanted independence, but because of a sound, a breath they could not stop hearing. Ha! And the silence that followed it. Outpost Helix 4, Border Sector Gamma 29, Captain Lauren of the Vurax Resistance watched the encrypted feed. Static. Then a flicker. A single symbol glitched across the screen. Two curved lines, one above, one below, mimicking the flow of in and out, breathing. It was spreading again. They said the sound hadn't been heard in weeks. That was a lie. The sound had just gotten quieter, quieter, and closer. Lauren turned to her crew. "I want a team ready to breach Kesh 9 within the day." One technician paled. "You want to go down there? We buried it for a reason." "Exactly," Lauren said. "Which means the truth's still sealed, down there. The Dominion's dying from a ghost. We need to find out what's real before the fear finishes what Wren started. The descent begins." Their dropship broke through the scorched atmosphere like a steel coffin returning to its grave. Kesh 9's surface was still blackened from orbital bombardment, veins of hardened glass spiderwebbing in every direction. The team, 6 Vurax and 1 cybernetic probe, landed near a subsurface access shaft buried beneath slag. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The moment they stepped into the shaft, the air changed. Even sealed in suits, they felt it. A pressure, a presence, as though something was holding the planet's lungs still. Hours passed as they carved downward, through rock, metal, artificial strata. Then they found the ruins of the Red Room melted walls. Half-subsumed consoles, twisted corridors, the pod chamber was still intact, untouched. It shouldn't be this pristine, murmured a scout. Everything else is slag. Why is this still whole? Lauren didn't answer. She could already hear it. Faint, rhythmic, not through her ears, through her blood. Ah, ha! They opened the null emission pod. It hissed. Then nothing. It was empty. No body, no remains, no traces, just a deep impression on the floor, as if something had sat there, unmoving, for days, or weeks, or longer. "Where is he?" one whispered. "No," one answered. Then the lights began to fail, one by one. Above, in orbit, the Vurax dreadnought Void's Vengeance watched the expedition feed, then all telemetry cut out. The commander tried to re-establish connection. Only static. Then, "Hey!" One exhale. No scream, no warning. The entire crew froze, and all across the ship, Vurax officers stopped what they were doing and turned, without prompting, toward the planet, as if listening. Back on the surface, Captain Lawrence stared into the darkness of the open pod. They had found nothing, and that terrified her more than finding a corpse, because it meant he was no longer bound, not by walls, not by stone, not by rules. "He's gone," someone said. "No," Lauren whispered. "He's everywhere." The breath wasn't a sound anymore. It was a pattern, a rhythm, a psychic echo in the minds of those who had once sought to master him. And now they would never be able to forget him, because the moment they heard it, the moment they understood, they were already infected. Above, in Dominion Command centers, a new directive began circulating. No mention of the human is permitted. No reference, no analysis, no memory. If symptoms persist, isolate and euthanize. But it didn't matter. You can't erase a breath, especially when it's the last thing you hear before the dark takes you. The Raskari Collective had always watched from the shadows. Scavengers, salvagers, and opportunists. They had no empires, no grand fleets, no illusions of dominance. But when the Dominion began to rot from within, its fleets silent, its colonies fractured, the Raskari saw something else, a void, a power vacuum, and in the center of it, a name they didn't dare speak, a silence they couldn't trace. Admiral Jethis, leader of the Raskari Void-clad, stood before the command council and played back the smuggled footage, the breathing. The sound was degraded, low quality, distorted by distance and interference. Still, every being in the chamber flinched. One of the junior tacticians began to cry. Jethis paused the playback. "Dominion Command is collapsing," he said. "Their protocols are paralyzed. Their officers won't enter certain systems. We now know why." A moment of silence, then, "We don't fear it," he said. "We study it. We harness it." Project Revenant began the next day. They scoured wreckage from abandoned Dominion outposts, looking for any scrap of data, any record tied to the human Elias Wren. His DNA, if any could be found. His speech patterns, his image, though most visuals, were burned or erased in Whisper Protocol. What they found instead were survivors, Dominion officers who hadn't succumbed. They were mute, catatonic, but their minds were still alive. Raskari neuroscribes interfaced with one. After 12 hours, the scribe tore off her headgear and vomited across the lab floor. "He's still in there," she whispered. "He sits in their thoughts. He waits. He's not trying to kill them. They're killing themselves, just trying to get away from him." The Raskari were undeterred. "If the Dominion couldn't break him," Jethus said, "maybe we don't need to." They began construction of the echo chamber, a zero-stimulus environment modeled after Wren's last known prison. Their plan: recreate the conditions that birthed the mimetic entity, feed it energy, observation, minds, and then unleash it. It took weeks to capture a psychic resonance from the tomb world of Kesh 9. The breathing signal had decayed, splintered into fractals. But the Raskari didn't need the original. They just needed the rhythm. Once installed into their neural lattice, the first test subject survived only 6 minutes. His final words: "I can see him sitting there, not moving, not angry, just waiting for me to blink." The second subject lasted 23 minutes before the blood vessels in her eyes burst. But unlike the Dominion, the Raskari adapted. They filtered the signal through low-resolution sensory gates, watered it down, slowed the pulse. Eventually, one survived a full hour, and in that time, they extracted something new. A thought. Not a word, not language. Just a pressure in the back of the mind. A warning. You shouldn't be doing this, but they were already too deep. Jethus ordered the first field deployment. A captured Dominion cruiser was retrofitted with a resonance emitter tied to the Wren pulse. When activated, it projected the faintest echo of his breath across a populated world. It didn't take long. The colony panicked. Riots erupted. Civilians fled underground. Soldiers refused to wear audio receptors. Half the planetary defense grid was abandoned. Not a shot had been fired. Jethus stood triumphant before his council. "We have turned the Dominion's fear into our weapon." But he didn't see the look on his technician's face. She was staring at the resonance display. Her hands were trembling. "Sir, the signal's changing." "What do you mean?" She pointed to the waveform. "It's syncing with us. We were broadcasting him." Her voice dropped. "Now." "He's broadcasting back. Back on the echo chamber station, containment doors slammed shut. The neural lattice pulsed red. In every lab, on every deck." The sound returned. No speaker, no source, just the breath before the scream, and now it was inside them. It began with breath, not a scream, not a threat, just breath. Soft, slow, rhythmic. But this time, the breath didn't stay in the echo chamber. It didn't need to, because Elias Wren was never just flesh, never just a prisoner. The Vurax had made him into something else, an idea wrapped in discipline, a reflection forged in silence, and the Raskari gave him everything he needed to cross the final threshold: a transmitter, echo chamber station cycle, 241, system-wide blackout. It started with lights dimming, then the temperature dropped. No alarms. No impacts. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that pressed against your chest and made you wonder if you were still alive. The kind of stillness that makes sound feel like a betrayal. Then a whisper echoed in the dark. "He's here." And then the first body fell, not from violence, from panic, from terror, from forgetting how to inhale. Planet Dareth 9, Raskari colony, 12 million inhabitants, 4 defense grids, 0 enemy fleets in orbit, and yet every broadcast tower suddenly glitched. Every screen blinked, every speaker, no matter how disconnected, hissed to life. Ha ha. People froze in their homes. Children wept and didn't know why. Veterans of 3 wars curled into corners and begged the silence to stop. Some suffocated without a mark on their bodies. Some clawed their own ears, hoping to shut the breath out. None of them realized it wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from behind their eyes. Admiral Jethus locked down the last safe deck aboard Echo Chamber Station. His face, normally a mask of confidence, now sagged under the weight of unseen pressure. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. "You can't weaponize something that doesn't want to be used." His technician, pale and trembling, whispered, "We didn't broadcast him. We summoned him." On the screen behind them, security footage flickered. A hallway, empty, then not. A shadow, a figure, sitting upright at the end, still, unmoving, watching. Then, blackness. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Dominion's fractured sectors went utterly silent. Rebel warlords who had once clawed for power now abandoned strongholds. Entire species began to erase all data on humans, hoping to somehow unknow what they'd seen. But it was too late. Ren was no longer a man. He was the echo left in the mind after the screaming stops. He was every breath you took, wondering if it would be your last. One final transmission. Single message left the echo chamber before its systems collapsed entirely. No encryption, no signature, just 5 words. "We opened the wrong door." Then silence. And in that silence, a breath. But this time it wasn't threatening. It was calm, purposeful. Somewhere deep in the void, deeper than space, deeper than thought. Elias Wren sat with his eyes closed. He did not speak. He did not need to. He had done what no army could. He had turned fear itself into a weapon by being the one thing they couldn't understand. A human, a soldier, a man who refused to break. Aftermath. The Dominion collapsed within a cycle. The Raskari Collective followed 2 weeks later. In time, the rest of the galaxy simply learned to avoid the dead. Systems, they never spoke the name, never mentioned the sound, never trained their microphones on those cursed frequencies. They feared triggering a return, but those who had heard it knew the truth. Elias Wren had never left. He had just learned to wait, and sometimes when the stars fall quiet, you can still hear it. A slow, deliberate inhale, like the universe itself holding its breath, waiting for someone to listen. The end.